So I'll be talking about how we started with a constraint-based system and how we moved towards a flexible system and why we did so. So let me start by setting a brief context for you. So let's start about design system versus a UI kit. Yeah, I know this is the reaction that you might have, right? Okay, I'm not going to bore you. What is a design system? So design system basically dictates your style guides, your branding, your tone, your copywriting, everything, right? And what we produce as artifacts are components, right? So it's not just components, but the components are just an artifacts of all of these things. What is a UI kit? It's a one-size-fits-all, right? You have dozens of components, utilities, which would ease your job. You could do anything and everything, right? Because it's basically native HTML elements, but visually better. So now basically design system, if I go with the definition, it's basically set of guided principles, right? Which would define your brand, how your UI should look, how your UX should look, right? But do you think that just laying down the foundation and then asking people to just follow that would work? Will anyone of you do that way? Like imagine someone telling you that, okay, before you code a component or let's say a button, you have to read like a brochure of 10 pages. Would you do that? Of course not, right? And we can't even, that's a wrong expectation to have in first place. So we wanted a guided system which would basically dictate these guiding principles, and it will help our developers and designers to design the way we want our brand identity to look like, and not like, just keep on thinking that, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that, this and that, and all those things. So now, in order to prevent certain things from happening, we would put some boundaries, right? Now it'll be like, come on, none of us likes boundaries, right? So let me start with a background, right? So where were we when we started? So these are like different flavors of our landing pages. By the way, all of them are on razorpay.com. But all of them look visually different, right? They have different typography styles, they have different buttons, they have different color styles, they have different primary, secondary, accent, and n number of colors that you could define from it, right? And then we have different UI, but for the same UX. All of them are asking you to log in one way or the other, but these are all Razorpay's products, but all of them had different UIs. Now the reason for this was because all of them were designed in different snapshots of time and at a different duration when the company was creating more products. And since we didn't have a design guideline, which means if you don't have a guideline, what do? You basically pick up whatever is the latest trend at that time, right? And that's exactly what we also did. And this is like our dashboards. They are dashboards, but they are again different UI. The UX is similar. The use cases are different, of course, but again, the UI is different. Like no one would say that, okay, these two products are Razorpay's product. They would look like they come from a completely different brand. And these are the number of buttons that are scraped from across our products. And these are just few of them. This is another use case of accordions versus collapsible. So accordions are something where you, let's say, if I give you an example of accordion, you would use it where you show some FAQ section, right? But you would use collapsible where you would like to show more, show less, or view more details kind of a behavior, right? So these are again different patterns that we came across our products for the same or similar UX behavior. These are alerts. They all define, they have some intent to convey to user, but they all look visually different. These are again, I'm not sure if it's visible, but these are like segmented controls. If you remember, people on iOS would be able to relate. But these are like segmented controls, different products, different UI, similar behavior. How many carousel variations can you think of? 1, 2, okay, 3, 4, these many. This is just a zoomed out version. So all of these are from, like this is a research audit, right? And this was my reaction when the designer showed the audit, right? Like, and it's obvious because there was no guideline. Everyone was doing whatever they felt was right. And it works. So what are the approach, like what are the different approaches that we had at hand when we were like, trying to fix these kind of issues? So we had 2 approaches. The first one, just create a system of reusable components and people can do what they do today. So the pros were faster adoption of the system. Of course, like we all want adoption, right? Productivity boost, because people won't be writing CSS by hand or rewriting the same components over and over again. More flexibility to tinker with whatever they have. But there was a con. It's a Swiss knife, right? We'll end up in the same state, but with a system now. There was another approach. That was like create a system that is more guided, but within the boundaries of our principles. Now, of course, there were pros. It would be more declarative, and designers, they don't need to focus on UI, but they can focus more on UX. Consistent experience across our products, that will also result in reduced learning curve for our users. Okay, I'm talking just from a user's perspective right now. What are the cons? Slower adoption of the system, of course, right? More efforts in educating people, telling them of why certain things work the way they are, right? So, before I go into what approach did we decide, I want to talk about this. So, how many of you over here are building a design system or are using a design system in your org? Quite a few. Okay, all right. So, if you are working on the design system team, you would be able to relate to this, that it's like 60% communication, 20% is writing code, 10% is planning, right? And 5% are like your internal discussions, and the rest 5% is panic, right? Coming back, what approach did we choose, right? Before I go there, I want to present a hot take that someone from the team shared it last week. So I'll just read it out loud. So this says that design systems basically bring in certain approaches and patterns, and they introduce healthy patterns. Now, while you're introducing healthy patterns, it inherently means that you're exposing unhealthy practices, right? And no one would like their code to be pinpointed by someone else or by a system, right? So, to all of you who are building a design system, God bless you. You are doing something for a good cause. So, before we arrived at a decision, we asked ourselves a question, like, why are we building a system, right? We came out with a couple of goals. The first one was to give a cohesive experience to our users across Razorpay products. The next one was, again, now we need to also think about our devs and designers, right? Because they are the consumers of the system. So we wanted them to do more rather than putting some random components and then marking box as button or box as link, right? We don't wanted them to be in that place. And then we wanted to prevent people from spending time configuring and playing around with different variants, identifying, okay, I'll just do trial and error and see what works and what doesn't, right? We wanted them to write less CSS spaghetti code, but just do whatever it dictates on the design. And we decided to go ahead with approach number 2. You might ask, a good DX helps build a great UX, right? So with guided system, we wanted to help people to take more informed decision. And we know that if we would have given all the flexibilities, which means you would have all the superpowers, and we would again be in the same state from where we started off, which is this, this, and this, right? So since we went ahead with approach 2, now let me share few examples of how did we actually executed it. Let's start with typography components, the easiest one of all and the most used component. So we had 3 typography components: title, heading, text. All 3 of them had different use cases. You would use title for your above the fold titles or the headings in your landing pages. You would use headings for describing different sections of the page. And then you would use text, which is for everything else, also the body text, right? So these were like 3 components, and what we also did was that we made it more guided, which means you could play around with different sizes, and that will also result in automatically resolving and rendering the corresponding heading tags. This is applicable to titles and headings, right? Because these are mostly header tags. So this would take care of it automatically. So a lot of you might think that we could have just implemented text and exposed as prop, right, and be done with it. That you say text and I'll just render it H1, H2, whatever it is, right? But again, we wanted to help or enable people, basically our designers and devs, to think about this thing less and just take logical decisions that, okay, hey, this is title, I'll just use title component with this size. Hey, this is heading, I'll just use heading, right? Instead of just saying, okay, I'll do H1, H2, and then figure out, oh, someone wrote the above the fold section, they used H1, so I also need to now keep in mind that, okay, I need to have accessibility hierarchy in place, so should I go and check and all those things, right? So we wanted to avoid all those scenarios. But there were boundaries. So the boundary was, when we first started, we saw that there were misuses of like our typography components. Before we introduced a typography component, we found a lot of patterns where people were using, let's say, multi-line text in a single line for cases where it wasn't supposed to be. And then people were also passing multiple styling of text within a text, right, which is a pretty common use case. So we started off by just making the typography components accept only strings. And like they didn't even support the as prop for all the reasons that I just mentioned. But then, this is evolution, right? So till the point that we had the strings as the boundaries, the typography component served us good 8 months. And it kind of helped us to remove all the misusages of the typography components across our products, which means we made some progress, that the boundaries gave us some benefits. And then, of course, you have to think about evolution, right? The design systems always keep on evolving. So then we had a use case on landing pages, right? That we need to have multicolor text in one single line. And then there were also use cases where people wanted to configure the corresponding header text. So what we decided was that sure, we will just convert the strings to accept any React node, right? And we'll also expose as prop. But if you see, the as prop, they are very logical. Like you can't say, I want to render title as P. The title will mostly give you the heading tags. Similar it goes to headings. And text wouldn't have H1, H2, H3. So we had boundaries, we evolved, We gave flexibilities, but again within the boundaries of our principles. Now, the next component. How many of you have been in this situation? Buttons as links, links as button. So let me start with links. So we had two variants of links. One was you can render links as button, and the second was you can render links as anchor. If you could see, so the navigation ones are the one which will redirect you to a different page or a URL, right? That is basically your forgot password, your sign up, your contact us, and things like that. And there are use cases like resend OTP, which doesn't need the navigation. Apply coupon, doesn't need the navigation, right? So links qualified that, and we were like, fine, we'll just add button and anchor as two different variants to link. So again, the guided capabilities, you could use anchor when you want the navigation to have in place, buttons when you just want to perform action. Now let's talk about buttons. We had three variants of buttons, primary, secondary, tertiary, pretty common. Again, these had guided capabilities that you would render different types of buttons when you want to have different emphasis for the users. You want your users to log in first, you would render login and sign up as secondary, login as primary, and vice versa. Now, what were the boundaries? Initially, when we started, we didn't add buttons which would also help to render links. And that again helped us eliminate things like, or patterns like this, where contact us is not really a button, because if you look at this UI, you are trying to grab the attention of a user on the button, while in reality that's not the case, right? So the correct usage of that is you would rather use a link with a anchor. But then again, we had these kind of use cases. So up until now, all our signups and everything, they were kind of being rendered on a modal or something, right? So then we had a legitimate use case where now we have a login or sign up system which is being tackled at a different domain. Similarly, what you would have seen with, let's say, sign in with GitHub, sign in with Google, with across different products, right? Which means I can't render links, right? It would look very weird. So, and then we introduced the link variant in button as well. So, like, we just don't take the path of adding boundaries first, right? All our decisions, they just revolve around the goals that we had decided, right? Are we enabling our designers and developers to do more with less? Is it helping our users? And are we eliminating the time devs are spending thinking about, okay, how do I make my code or my UI look similar to how my designer has given me? So when I say we don't take all our decisions with boundaries, let me talk about an example. So card, right? You might think that it's not more than like a style div with some properties assigned to it or a border radius, right? But then isn't that a Swiss knife? Like, how would you dictate that what patterns you want to support, correct? Now imagine we want to have permutation and combinations of these, right? You could have one of these, many of these, none of these, and all sorts of permutations and combinations. What would you do? Will you write guidelines? Of course not, right? Guidelines are not going to help us. So again, I might not read 10 pages of guidelines or instructions before I take a decision. So we wanted to fix this, and before we come up with a decision of what is the fine balance of flexibility and boundaries, it took us like 7 API reiterations, and I'm not kidding. You could go on GitHub and check this out. It took us 7 reiterations of just card to have a fine balance of flexibility as well as setting the boundaries. So the API, now these are kind of different patterns or permutation combination that you could create. Again, of course, it would be more just for demo purpose. So The capabilities are flexible, but again within the boundaries of the system. So let me show a demo, right? This is in Figma, our card component. So as a designer, what you have to do is tinker around bunch of toggles, and it will just render components. You don't have to use your brains and think about, okay, what is the right pattern? Should I have buttons on the left, on the right, in the center, or header on the left, right, center? These were the patterns that we had created. And if these things don't work for you, what you could do is you could just skip header and footer and just create your own pattern with just the slot, right? So this is the code equivalent of the Figma that I just showed. So if you could see, card has header, header has trailing, leading, similar for footer, right? So there were again some boundaries, right? You could render them, but you can't render any random subcomponents within card. It has to be card's subcomponents. If you think your use case is not fulfilled, you could just skip header, footer, and come up with a use case and put it in a card body, because that accepts any JSX. But if you try to put anything in header or footer apart from the subcomponents that it has already defined, it will just throw an error. So now this pattern basically gave us or help us define that, okay, there are header, footer in the slot. This is the pattern that we recommend. But if it doesn't work out for you, then you can still go ahead and use just the body and create for your use case. So it's like you don't have to write things every time, right? Imagine that if most of your product flows, they had use cases which had header and footer always. And if we had just given you a slot where you would just render your JSX, you would be tired of writing or recreating that across your product, right? So we thought about both the user personas, that okay, if you have header footer use cases, these are the predefined templates, and if it doesn't fit you, you can go ahead and put your defined use case in a slot. And with this, because this kind of worked out for us, so we had followed the same philosophy in other similar components like modal, bottom sheets, drop down. So finally, coming to the wrap. So this is where we were before our design system journey began, right? Since we had, as I started with that, we had different teams working in different groups. There was no convergence happening in terms of experience or designs, right? So the way more our team grew over the time, we had individual opinions, we had distinct experiences, and it just went on growing. And this is what I describe as a J curve for a design system. So we knew that adding certain boundaries is going to hamper certain things, but we were prepared for it. So it's like a dip before the rise. So we knew that we are in different directions, and if you want to bring in a change, you have to break certain practices that might initially lead to dip in your productivity. There would be a learning curve for the system, but that would be in the initial phase. But over time, it will just grow, right? Now, I won't say that we have nailed it fully, but we stand here today in this J curve. So we have had, it's not a straight path, and the way this curve seems, it's not as straight as this. We had challenges, we even do face challenges today, but we kind of set milestones and benchmarks that gives us the validation that, okay, things are going in the right direction. So coming back to our goals, all our decisions, they just revolve around these goals. And these are the examples. Like when I said decisions, it's not just our decision, it's combined as a team. So the way we make this in practice is that we write API, we call it as API decisions for each and every component. So before we start, we kind of put it on GitHub. We roll it out to all the consumer designers and consumer engineers. take feedbacks, collaborate, and then once this is freezed, only then we go ahead and start implementing them. So all of them are available on our repository. You can just go there, check out everything that I spoke today. And yes, thank you.